Back at the rooftop, Kevin had just ruthlessly killed the assassin and was about to leave. Sensing that Kyle Thompson was emotionally affected by this, Kevin advised that he should stop following him around and go back home to live a normal life. With the real game just beginning and various hidden enemies already prepared to kill him at any moment, Kevin didn't want to drag Kyle into all of this if he continued to be afraid. "Mr. Williams, I don't want to be a coward for the rest of my life. I want to become strong like you," Kyle Thompson replied stubbornly. "You must think about it carefully. I might not be able to take care of you in the future," Kevin let out a long sigh. Now he suddenly felt a little grateful to the Williams family. If he hadn't been exiled from his family and become the useless son-in-law of the Jones family, he might not have had his current courage and determination. Meanwhile, in the Swinton family's mansion, the 5 Hill siblings were currently sitting in the main hall. Across from them were more than 20 influential figures from St. Louis. However, the atmosphere in the room wasn't very harmonious, and it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that strong tensions were brewing. "Mr. Thompson, shouldn't you give us an explanation? Why did you bring the members of the Radiants here? Didn't the bomb explode the moment they arrived at the airport?" one of the leaders complained. "If you don't have a good explanation, I don't think the Radiants should be allowed in St. Louis," another shared his opinion on the situation. With all of these influential figures discussing the matter, things would probably have escalated into hostility if it hadn't been for Joseph Thompson's presence there. "Will everyone please be quiet for a moment?" Joseph Thompson waved his hand and continued. "The Radiance was invited by Mr. Williams to get rid of the evil group that took over Blade Mountain. I believe everyone's businesses have suffered a lot because of those bandits. And without the Radiance, what else can we do?" The moment these words came out of his mouth, everyone in the hall instantly calmed down. Some of them knitted their brows tightly and their eyes were filled with complex emotions. "There's one more thing that I want to clarify with everyone here. The Radiance had nothing to do with the explosion at the airport today," Dylan Hill said slowly. "I don't need you to believe my words, but as far as the Radiance is concerned, we won't take responsibility for something that we've never done before." The meaning behind his words was very clear. The Radiants didn't feel a need to explain themselves, nor did they care what other people thought of them. "Are you looking down on us? How dare you insult us like that?" one of the business leaders sneered. "No one here is stupid enough to believe your lies. Just take your men and leave St. Louis immediately while you can," another threatened him. All of the influential leaders there suddenly became riled up. Some of them couldn't help but stand up and point their fingers at the 5 Hill siblings in anger. Just then, a terrifying aura once again emitted from Dylan Hill's body, instantly affecting everyone's mood. "Let this serve as my final warning. The Radiance doesn't answer to anyone but the Chancellor, so if anybody dares to speak any more nonsense, don't blame me for showing no mercy." Dylan wasn't a good-tempered person. In fact, he was the most ruthless among the Hill siblings. As expected, after he finished speaking, no one dared to argue with him anymore. At that point, everyone was more concerned about their own lives. None of them wanted to die. In the Huxley family's mansion, Virgil Huxley looked at his son with a frown as he took a deep breath. "Did you install the camera in the study?" Virgil suppressed the anger in his heart and asked. "I was just messing around. I thought it would be a fun prank." Thornton lowered his head and avoided his father's gaze. It seemed that Curtis Green had caught him watching the surveillance footage after all. "Let me ask you something. Do you know what I've been up to for the past few days?" Virgil's eyebrows slightly furrowed as a violent aura began to surround his body. "Do you really need to ask me that?" Thornton took a few deep breaths. He then mustered enough courage in his heart to keep going. "Dad, why did you do that? Didn't you always teach me to be an honorable man when I was young?" "Where has honor gotten anyone in this day and age?" Virgil suddenly slammed his fist on the table. "Don't be so stupid, son. Pursuing good and avoiding evil will only make us weak and poor. Do you understand?" Thornton stared at his father in a daze. He licked his dry lips, but he didn't know what to say. "Have you been muddle-headed all these years?" Virgil stood up with his hands behind his back and paced back and forth in front of Thornton. "The Thompson family has Herman Thompson as their leader and is revered by everyone. That being said, the Swinton family is poised to become the most powerful family in the Midwest area. Not only does Richard Swinton have his wife's Armstrong family behind him, but he now has the Radiants to support with Kevin as his foster son." Virgil continued, "Where does that leave the Huxley family? Since coming to St. Louis, each generation has been left worse off than the last. And if I don't find a way to remedy the situation sooner or later, our entire family will be devoured by someone else." Virgil then stepped in front of Thornton and placed his hands on his son's shoulders. "What I did was for the sake of our ancestors and for the generations to come. Do you understand, son? I did what I had to do to preserve our family's legacy. When you become my successor, you'll also understand the difficulties of being the family patriarch." Meanwhile, Kevin had just returned to the Swinton family's mansion with Kyle when Joseph Thompson immediately came to greet them at the door. "Mr. Williams, you're finally here." Joseph wiped the sweat off his forehead. When he saw that his son wasn't injured, he let out a long sigh of relief. "Thank you for your hard work, Mr. Thompson." Kevin patted Joseph's shoulder and slowly walked inside. "Greetings, Mr. Williams." The 5 men stood up and called out respectfully. Kevin had previously told them not to address him as Chancellor in order to protect his secret identity. "Mr. Williams, you're so arrogant. How dare you make all of us wait for such a long time?" one of the leaders shouted. "Don't waste our time any longer. Now that the people from the Radiants are here, when are you going to deal with those bandits at Blade Mountain?" Another was getting impatient. "If you're afraid, it's not too late to leave now while you still have some dignity left," the third one mocked. As the group of community and industry leaders looked at him maliciously, all kinds of sarcastic remarks poured out of their mouths. "Since everyone is so eager for the Radiants to take care of Blade Mountain, then we'll gladly accept the task." Kevin didn't pay any attention to the insults the people were hurling at him. "Dylan, listen up. Tomorrow, we'll go with our members to Blade Mountain at 8 o'clock in the morning." Kevin decisively gave the order. He had already wasted a lot of time in St. Louis. Before anyone who wanted to harm him had the chance to strike again, he had firmly put his foot down so that he could make his presence felt. And Blade Mountain was the perfect chance to establish the prestige of the Radiants. The night passed by quickly. Early the next morning, without alerting anyone, Kevin gathered all the members of the Radiants and rushed towards Blade Mountain. "Do you think they'll succeed?" Joseph Thompson asked while looking at the rising sun on the horizon. "Kevin is very smart and capable. We have to trust him." Richard Swinton casually stood with his hands behind his back and reassured him. The two of them had been standing on the balcony of the Swinton family's mansion for almost an hour. "I can't believe that Virgil Huxley actually dared to do such a thing. I never liked the man, but I feel so betrayed. How could he do all of this behind our backs?" Richard suddenly remarked. "The Huxley family's selfish ambition will be their downfall." Joseph smiled confidently and then added, "This game of chess has already started, and I'm looking forward to what will happen next." "Is the Thompson family finally going to make a move?" Richard looked at him in surprise. If Kevin had been present at that moment, he would definitely have found that both Richard Swinton's and Joseph Thompson's temperaments had undergone a distinctive change. They were completely different from the refined mask that they wore in front of other people. As Kevin and the members of the Radiants made their way towards Blade Mountain, Joseph Thompson and Richard Swinton were talking on the balcony of the Swinton family's residence. Confident in Kevin's ability to handle that matter, the two of them discussed Virgil Huxley's betrayal. and the Huxley family's downfall. Richard then asked Joseph whether the Thompson family was finally going to make a move as well. "The game has already started. We can't let the Huxley family have all the fun, can we?" Joseph patted Richard's shoulder and said, "Virgil Huxley has already made his choice to go against us. He can do whatever he wants, but believe me when I say that the Huxley family's days are numbered." According to the information we received, the 7 people in charge at Blade Mountain are all level 5 experts. In addition, out of the thousands of people under them, almost half are also trained in combat. And although their strength level isn't high, they still possess a geographical advantage as the mountain has a lot of blind spots. That means that, if we attack them forcefully, we might suffer a lot of casualties. Dylan Hill reported as they quickly passed through the forest. With a large number of people participating in the battle, Kevin wanted to catch the Blade Mountain bandits off guard. So he chose to start off by attacking them from long range. "Are our members ready for battle?" Kevin asked without changing his expression. "Don't worry, Chancellor. Our men are prepared." Dylan Hill was puzzled. Why did Kevin suddenly ask about this style of attack? "When we arrive at the foot of Blade Mountain, ask 5,000 of our members to set up from a long distance away and attack with their bows and arrows. The other 3,000 men will stand by and prepare for close-range combat." Kevin then turned his attention to the Hill siblings. "The 5 of you, follow me to their base. We'll go directly after the leader of their group and be the ones to draw their members out." "Yes, Chancellor." Although Dylan Hill didn't understand why only the 6 of them were going up the mountain, he didn't dare to question Kevin's strategy. After more than an hour, Kevin and the members of the Radiants finally arrived at the foot of the mountain. However, many of the people with lower strength levels were tired and gasping for breath by then. It had been quite a long journey. Kevin instructed, "Let everyone rest here for a while. Dylan and Cameron, follow me." Before Kevin could finish his words, he saw a black object falling from the sky above them. It was a bomb, and it was heading straight for them. "Everyone spread out." Kevin gathered his energy and shouted. The bomb struck down fiercely, causing a massive explosion once it hit the ground. The earth beneath them trembled as rocks and debris flew everywhere. Once the cloud of dust had settled, they saw that the blast had formed a deep pit in the ground, and their surroundings had turned black. Unfortunately, not all of the Radiant's members managed to escape in time and instantly lost their lives in the explosion. Moreover, many others had suffered grave injuries amidst miserable screams. "What's going on, Chancellor? Why would we suddenly be struck by lightning in the clear sky?" Looking at his fellow members who were left in a sorry state, Dylan asked in a puzzled voice. Kevin raised his head and looked back and forth across the sky. "That wasn't lightning, Dylan. Someone threw a bomb at us. They must have seen us coming as we approached from the distance." Hearing this, everyone was dumbfounded. Although they were all combat experts, they stood no chance against a bomb. "What is it with St. Louis and bombs? That's the 3rd one since yesterday." Dylan shook his head. "Let everyone retreat 100 yards right away. Gather the injured quickly and take care of them." Kevin walked towards the deep pit and looked up at the sky once again. What the hell is the Chancellor trying to do? Isn't he afraid of being struck again by another bomb? Julia Hill asked in a daze. "Nonsense. The Chancellor knows what he's doing. Let's just trust him." Dylan Hill brushed off his sister's comment. While the two of them were talking, Kevin suddenly rushed out and ran hundreds of yards into the dense forest. "I can't believe I underestimated these bandits." Kevin stopped at a rock. He slowly closed his eyes and used his spiritual energy to sense his surroundings. Since learning how to use his energy base to gain heightened senses from the Night King, this was the first time he was using this skill in real life. As he used this to connect with the energy in his surroundings, Kevin could feel the grass and trees around him, as well as the subtle movements of insects. It had to be said that this was the first time Kevin had such a feeling. It was as if he was one with heaven and earth. After being immersed in this wonderful feeling for some time, he suddenly opened his eyes. He now knew exactly where the bandits' hideout was. "They won't know what's coming," Kevin said with a mischievous smile. Using his quick speed, he then ran a few hundred yards in the blink of an eye. In the bandits' hideout at the top of Blade Mountain, 7 men were sitting side by side in a row. Each of them had a strong aura, and their powerful muscles were full of explosive force.
"I wonder who those people were. They actually dared to attack us?"
One of the men sneered.
"Must have been one of those 10 grade schools, but we have nothing to worry about. I'm guessing more than half of them died in the explosion, while the rest must have retreated back to where they came from."
Another mocked. "I doubt that it's one of the great powers. I heard that their leader was just a useless son-in-law from the countryside. Regardless, they were quite foolish to think that they could defeat us." A third one shook his head. All of them laughed loudly throughout this exchange. The 7 men were the leaders of the bandit group that took over Blade Mountain. They were notorious for causing trouble across different cities over the years. While their identities remained a secret, they internally referred to themselves by their rank using the alphabet, namely Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, and Golf. Suddenly, one of their henchmen ran into their hideout in a panic. He was so anxious that his forehead was covered in sweat.
"Sorry to bother you all, but the enemy is fast approaching. Our men who had set up the defense along the way couldn't stop them, and they're already near the mountain peak,"
the henchman reported.
"What the hell? Didn't the bomb already cause heavy losses to their group?"
Charlie, the man ranked 3rd among the 7, asked in disbelief.
"It did, but it seems that we underestimated their true number, and the rest of them aren't backing down."
The henchman's body began to tremble under Charlie's angry glare. Hearing that, the 7 leaders frowned and furrowed their brows.
"Brothers, just wait here for a while. I'll go down the mountain to take a look."
Charlie picked up his longsword from the side and quickly walked out of their hideout. At that moment, all of Blade Mountain was filled with people from the Radiants. Thanks to Kevin's strategy, the bandit group's henchmen were defeated steadily one by one. Most of them had already been eliminated by arrows from the Radiants' long-range marksmen, while the rest were now outnumbered and overwhelmed by their close-range combat experts as they advanced towards the top of the mountain.
"Chancellor, it looks like dealing with these bandits will be a piece of cake,"
Dylan Hill remarked as he punched the ground, sending out a force that immediately knocked a group of henchmen off their feet. "The main reason is that the Radiance is so powerful, and with the Chancellor leading the way, nothing can stop us." Julia Hill smugly wiped the blood off her blade.
"Our job here will be done in less than 2 hours.
Cameron Hill casually bragged as he killed 2 henchmen with a powerful punch and kick combo. All right, that's enough gloating. Given what's at stake today for the Radiants, I don't want it to seem like too much of a cheap win. Kevin also had a smile on his face. Besides, we can't lower our guards just yet, so try to be more serious. After we eliminate these Blade Mountain bandits in one fell swoop, we still have to go back to St. Louis and deal with everyone else. As soon as he finished speaking, Kevin stopped in his tracks when he sensed something. Suddenly, a small ray of light appeared to be flying in the air above them.
"What is that thing? Could it be a shooting star in broad daylight?"
Dylan curiously scratched the back of his head and wondered out loud. With the bandit group's henchmen being overwhelmed by the Radiants, the Hill siblings began to brag about how it was such an easy victory. However, just as Kevin told them to be more serious, they suddenly saw a small ray of light flying in the air above them, and they all wondered what it was. It took them a few seconds to realize that it wasn't a shooting star at all, but a longsword coming at them at high speed. "Everyone, back off! Run for cover and hide!" Kevin's loud and clear voice spread across half of the mountain. A loud bang shook the entire mountain as the longsword pierced through the ground, and the violent force caused several cracks to appear in the ground around them.
"Where did you troublemakers come from?" Did you actually think that you could come here recklessly and barge into our territory without losing your lives?"
Charlie yelled as he grabbed the handle of his longsword and his gaze swept across the entire scene.
"Finally, someone worthy of our blade has arrived."
A strong fighting spirit appeared in Dylan Hill's eyes. Kevin waved his hand and swept away the dust on his jacket, then pointed at Charlie and shouted,
"Who's willing to go up and take him down?" "Let us deal with him, Chancellor."
The 5 Hill siblings rushed out from beside him at the same time.
"Anyone who dares to come here is only seeking death. Mere ants like you won't stand a chance against my wrath."
A violent, killing intent burst out from Charlie's eyes as he pounded on his chest a few times like a wild beast. He then climbed up a tree, took a deep breath, and let out a loud and piercing roar that started shaking the earth once again. This forced the 5 Hill siblings to stop in their tracks, and the members of the Radiants who were only level 1 and 2 experts immediately fell to the ground, covering their ears and struggling in pain. Some of the weaker ones even spat out a mouthful of blood and passed out. Did he just perform the legendary lion's roar technique? Kevin looked at Charlie in shock. As a skill that only level 5 experts had enough energy base to do, he'd never actually seen this in action before. After roaring for half a minute, Charlie finally stopped. Then he jumped from the tree and landed nimbly on the ground. As he fearlessly rushed into the middle of the 5 Hill siblings, he moved swiftly with his longsword like a lion that was about to pounce on its prey. Kevin quickly gave out a command. Use the Pentagon formation to deal with him. This was the formation that Kevin had taught the 5 Hill siblings when the Radiance was first established, allowing them to attack and defend themselves in unison from all directions.
"No such formation will work on me."
Charlie waved the longsword in his hand as he swung it at Dylan Hill. At the same time, the other 4 Hill siblings used their swords to protect Dylan, ready to block his attack.
"You're courting death."
Charlie taunted as he changed the direction of his attack halfway through his advance, emitting a powerful aura as he swept his longsword horizontally instead of slashing forward. Just before Charlie's longsword could land, Dylan, Sarah, Cameron, and Isaiah Hill quickly dispersed to the side one after another, while Julia Hill appeared behind him like a ghost.
"Trying to launch a sneak attack on me, huh? Not so fast."
Charlie's alertness was quite strong as well. He quickly turned around and was about to strike again with his longsword. However, in the next second, he immediately froze. A sharp blade that shone with a cold light stopped right by the neck as Sarah Hill had suddenly appeared in front of him. Kevin tried to stop her from slicing Charlie's throat. "Don't kill him just yet," he shouted. However, he was a moment too late. Sarah's blade had already cut through Charlie's skin. Luckily, the wound across his neck wasn't deep enough to kill him.
"I refuse to accept the fact that you're bullying me with numbers. Don't be such cowards."
Even though he was a level 5 expert, it was obvious that Charlie couldn't handle all 5 of the Hill siblings at once. At this moment, it seemed that he was demanding to fight one-on-one. Anything is fair game on a battlefield. Why the hell would we want to fight one-on-one? Kevin shook his head. Now he had some doubts about whether his idea of keeping the man alive was correct or not. With that, he quickly popped a bone-biting pill into Charlie's mouth to make him suffer. Get some of our men to keep an eye on him for now. The rest of us will continue to march up the mountain. Kevin was determined to take down the Blade Mountain bandits as soon as possible. Meanwhile, in the dean's office of the Healing Arts School, Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard seemed to be discussing something.
"Have all of the elders and leaders already returned to their schools?"
Wayne Ford slowly poured himself a cup of coffee. It had been a long night of tense discussions. I've already told them to prepare. They're ready to send people to Chicago at any time," Harley Shepard confirmed. He still wanted to say something, but hesitated to speak. "You can say whatever you want to say. What's running through your mind?" Wayne glanced at him and asked. Harley let out a long breath and revealed what was troubling him. "I feel that Kevin will be in big trouble this time. I received a message from St. Louis saying that the Morris family is currently there." Wayne Ford's hand suddenly trembled when he heard that, spilling some of his coffee on the floor. "Is the information reliable?" Wayne was in disbelief. "The Morris family hasn't been in the spotlight for many years. If they're making a move..." Before he could finish, Wayne Ford quickly put down the cup of coffee in his hand. "Why didn't we think of them before? With the Pinnacle making a comeback, no wonder the Morris family has suddenly resurfaced. They're going to be a great asset for us in this upcoming war, just like before." Wayne Ford patted his forehead and said, "They must have found something in St. Louis that can boost the overall strength of their family." "I'm not so sure whether they have good intentions this time. As you said, we haven't heard from them in years, and they could simply be using the war to raise their family back to prominence," Harley said with an anxious look on his face. "Kevin is in St. Louis, isn't he? What if the Morris family has come for him and his power pill formula?" The office fell into silence. Wayne Ford shook his head slightly when he heard Harley's words. He suddenly felt that the situation had become even more complicated to navigate, given this latest wrinkle. How can Kevin be so good at causing trouble? First, he had a bad relationship with the Williams family. Then he had somehow offended the Union. And now that he had gone to St. Louis, he managed to attract the attention of the Morris family. Because of Kevin, the Union was already a thorn in their side. Just yesterday, Vivian Myers and Renee Silver had caused a scene and argued with Wayne Ford in front of everyone at the meeting. However, if Kevin were to also fight against the Morris family at full strength, Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard might not be able to protect him from Chicago, especially since they just sent the entire Healing Arts School to capture Kevin. Why did the two of them do this? Instead of protecting him, it would only add to his burden if he were being hunted from all directions. "It seems like I have to make a trip to St. Louis myself." With a profound look in his eyes, Wayne let out a deep sigh. The hideout at the top of Blade Mountain had now been surrounded by thousands of members of the Radiants. On the other hand, there were less than 200 bandits remaining as they tried to make a last stand. It had been less than 3 hours since the battle started, and the outcome was almost one-sided in favor of the Radiants. For them, it was as easy as crushing dried weeds and rotten wood up to this point. Kevin, who had just stepped onto the top of the mountain, looked at the 6 bandit leaders not far away. He feigned a harmless and sincere smile and said, "Greetings. It's good to finally meet the 6 of you. I didn't mean to offend you by coming here, but since you recklessly ambushed my men, I hope you don't blame me for what we're about to do." Hearing this, the 6 leaders couldn't help but glare at him and bare their teeth. They were all fuming at Kevin's words. "Why did you bring your men to attack us? You almost killed all of our men on the mountain, yet you still have the nerve to say that you had no intention of offending us?" Bravo, the leader ranked second among them, wasn't having any of it, and asked gruffly, "And where's Charlie?" "Oh, you mean the guy with the big sword?" Kevin was stunned for a moment, then he said regretfully, "I'm afraid it's a little too late for him. Given the unimaginable discomfort and pain that he was experiencing when we left him, he probably chose to end his own life by now." Kevin and the Radiants had finally reached the bandit group's hideout at the top of Blade Mountain, where the 6 bandit leaders and their remaining henchmen were making a last stand. When Kevin tried to explain his actions to them, Bravo, the bandit leader who was ranked second, wasn't having any of it. And after Bravo asked him where Charlie was, Kevin remarked that he must have taken his own life by now, after being given a bone-biting pill.
Who killed our brother?
Alpha, the first-ranked bandit leader, took 2 steps forward and pointed at Kevin's face. As I said, if he's indeed dead, it would have been by his own choice. I simply caused him some discomfort, Kevin playfully teased. Bravo seethed in anger and began to size up Kevin. You?
Who the hell are you? How dare you talk to our chancellor like that?
Dylan Hill immediately stepped in between the two and shoved Bravo away.
You bastard! I'll have your life as an apology.
Alpha clenched his fist tightly. The other 5 bandit leaders also looked at Kevin with lethal intent when they learned of Charlie's fate. The members of both sides sensibly took a few steps back, leaving enough space for their respective top leaders. A battle at this level wasn't something they could participate in. The rest of you don't have to do anything. I can handle them on my own. Kevin slowly took a few steps forward.
Chancellor!
The 5 Hill siblings called out worriedly. Stand back. You're no match for them. Kevin's words made them unable to step forward with him as they helplessly looked on. Even Dylan Hill wanted to say more, but when the words reached his throat, he suddenly stopped himself and obeyed Kevin's command. Unlike Charlie, who complained about facing 5 people and demanded a one-on-one fight earlier, Kevin wanted to prove that he was more powerful by taking on the remaining 6 bandit leaders, who were all level 5 experts, all at once.
Wait, you're their leader? Alpha looked at Kevin with disdain. If you're so strong, then why do you look like you're still a kid? You better hurry up and go home to drink some milk before your mom catches you sneaking out and causing trouble like this. He won't have the chance to go home to see his mother. He killed Charlie, so I'll make him pay with his life. Delta, the 4th-ranked bandit leader, angrily stood up beside him and scoffed. The remaining 4 brothers also walked to their side. Although the 7 of them were notorious for being bandit leaders that caused trouble, they were also living miserable lives. Because they didn't grow up in a rich family, they relied on each other to stick together and survive. But despite working hard to become self-taught level 5 experts, they were only seen as hired bandits who were paid to do a job. In a word, mercenaries. And they were often ridiculed and looked down upon by the great powers and prominent families who required their services. Now that one of their brothers had been taken from them, they wouldn't let Kevin get away with it. Hurry up and stop wasting my time. If you have any tricks up your sleeves, feel free to use them. After I'm finished with all of you, I still have to take my people back to St. Louis for dinner. Kevin impatiently beckoned them with his finger. Facing such mockery, Alpha could no longer hold it in. He drew out his long sword from behind his back and dragged the tip of its blade across the ground as he rushed towards Kevin. The energy flowing through his sword was so powerful that it caused debris to fly everywhere. Upon seeing this, a mischievous smile appeared on Kevin's face. He took out his own knight sword and held it horizontally in front of his chest, blocking Alpha's fierce sword attack with it. Dazzling sparks were emitted from the collision between the 2 swords. It seems like you really do have some skill. Kevin secretly acknowledged his opponent's strength in his heart. He truly was going up against a level 5 expert. This show is just about to start,
Alpha said with a sneer. You think you can defeat me on your own? Kevin asked as he raised one eyebrow. Before Alpha could answer his question, Delta and Echo spun a few times in the air. The long swords in their hands were headed straight for Kevin's shoulders. Kevin caught sight of them as he took a deep breath and jumped up over Alpha, barely dodging their swords by passing through the narrow gap in between them. The moment he landed on the ground, Kevin saw Bravo rushing towards him with iron chains and pushed him away forcefully. Then he used his free hand to pull out his knight dagger, raising it in the air as he turned around to defend himself against Foxtrot, who had suddenly appeared behind him. The tip of Foxtrot's 2 daggers accurately hit the blade of the night dagger, creating sparks as they collided. But since Kevin was more powerful, this caused Foxtrot to lose his grip on both of his weapons as they fell down on the ground. "Chancellor, be careful!" The 5 Hill siblings suddenly shouted out loud as they warned him about what was about to happen. Golf, being the only one who hadn't attacked yet, had been moving undetected like a ghost. He suddenly came to Kevin's left side and was about to stab him in the chest with a dagger. "Get lost!" Kevin let out an angry shout. A powerful spiritual energy surrounded his body in an instant as he forcefully sent both Foxtrot and Golf flying more than 30 feet away. Although they'd only exchanged blows with each other briefly, it had already stunned the surrounding members of both sides. Neither of them could tell who was going to come out on top. After Foxtrot and Golf managed to recover, they quickly rushed back to support Alpha and their other 3 brothers. This time, the 6 bandit leaders decided to attack in one go. Not only did they advance in an orderly manner, but their timing was also very much in sync. "Looks like you guys are really good at sticking together," Kevin said as he disdainfully stretched his arms and shoulders. Kevin quickly recalled the previous sequence of events in his mind. Alpha's fierce attack had attracted his attention. Although Delta and Echo were both skillful in their attacks, the most important thing they did was to buy time for both Bravo and Foxtrot to take their shot at him. However, the most dangerous one among all of them was Golf. He moved almost completely undetected. If it wasn't for the warning from the 5 Hill siblings, he might have been ambushed. It had to be said that the attack style of the 6 bandit leaders was quite impressive. The only other time Kevin had seen this level of flawless coordination involving multiple people was with the Hill siblings. Perhaps having a shared familial bond enabled them to fight with and for each other so effectively. If it was anyone else, the person they were fighting with would have been instantly killed. And if Charlie hadn't attacked alone and been captured earlier, perhaps dealing with all 7 of them would have been even more fatal. "Do you still think you can defeat me?" Kevin asked in a hostile tone. "Although you have a higher energy base compared to us, we're quite adept at taking advantage of our numbers and using a series of combo moves to kill people who are stronger than us." Alpha waved the longsword in his hand and was about to launch another attack. "Today you have no chance of winning. You won't leave this mountain alive." "How can you be so sure of that?" Kevin quickly put away his night dagger and turned his body slightly to avoid Alpha's aggressive stab. Before Alpha could strike again, Kevin quickly reached out and grabbed his wrist. He then gave a mighty pull, and at the same time, he quickly kicked him in the ankle. Just as Alpha was about to lose his balance, he swung his sword upwards to strike Kevin. However, Kevin managed to hit the man in the back with the handle of his night sword first. This caused blood to spurt out of Alpha's mouth as he fell to the ground, unable to move. Suddenly, 2 iron chains were about to hit Kevin in the face. "Come here!" After turning around to evade them, Kevin then grabbed the iron chains and pulled them hard. This dragged Bravo towards him, allowing Kevin to quickly hit him in the chest with his palm and make him spit out a mouthful of blood as well. "If any of you dare to move again, I guarantee that I'll kill the 2 of them," Kevin threatened as he grabbed Bravo by the throat and put his foot on Alpha's chest. The violent aura emitting from his body right now was much higher than theirs, and they could sense it. The remaining 4 brothers looked at each other and were stunned by Kevin. "You can have anything you want from us. Just let go of my brothers first." Delta slowly raised his longsword and pointed it at Kevin. "We can give you a lot of money in exchange for their lives. You'll be rich," Echo offered confidently. "Release my brothers, and I guarantee that you and your people can leave safely. Otherwise, even if we all die, we'll make sure to take your life before this is over," Foxtrot declared with a stern expression. Kevin looked at the 4 of them and asked, "If I let your brothers go, Are you willing to give me what I want?" Golf looked straight into his eyes and replied, "Let them go first. Then we can talk." When the 6 bandit leaders decided to attack for a second time, Kevin managed to defeat both Alpha and Bravo, the 2 highest-ranked men among them. As the remaining 4 brothers urged him to let them go, Kevin could sense that even though they all had very stern expressions, they were open to negotiating. So he asked them if they were willing to give him what he wanted in exchange for the 2 brothers' survival. With Charlie gone, the other 6 brothers couldn't afford to lose anyone else. Therefore, if Kevin wanted them to surrender, he knew that Delta and the other 3 brothers would agree without hesitation. "You guys are quite protective of each other." Kevin nodded in approval. He was very satisfied with the outcome. Even though these brothers were ferocious level 5 experts, he wouldn't take them under his command if they didn't care about relationships and loyalty. These 2 values were more important for Kevin than physical strength. "The way I see it, you're not in a position to demand my cooperation. That being said, these are my conditions for releasing your brothers. First, throw away the weapons in your hands. Then you must make a vow to follow me in the future. You can never have any thoughts of rebelling, and you'll stay loyal to my every command." Kevin firmly listed his non-negotiable terms. "After you killed Charlie, how can you expect us to still want to work for you? Dream on. If you must kill me for refusing, just do it right now." Alpha suddenly growled with a ferocious expression on his face. This was even more impressive because he was still lying on the ground with Kevin's foot on his chest. "Who told you that he was dead?" Kevin asked him with a frown. Delta and the other bandit leader looked at Kevin in shock and thought to themselves, "Didn't he just say that their brother had probably ended his own life by now?" Before they could react, Kevin gave Dylan Hill a knowing look. The latter immediately understood and ordered the other Radiance members to bring Charlie up to the mountain peak from where they were holding him halfway down the steep slope. In a luxurious mansion in St. Louis, many influential figures gathered together. "Do you think Kevin and the Radiants can really eliminate those bandits in Blade Mountain?" one of the leaders asked. "I don't think that's possible. The Dixon brothers all have their own unique skills and powerful energy base." "I don't think that's possible. The Dixon brothers all have their own unique skills and powerful energy base." Another shook his head. "In my opinion, Kevin and his group will definitely be wiped out. And even if he's lucky enough to survive in time, I'm sure he won't dare to return to St. Louis after suffering such an embarrassing defeat." A third one sneered. These influential people were the ones who had originally sided with Jeremy Long in opposing the Radiance's move into St. Louis. However, after the Long, Ross, Ryder, and Berger families were somehow persuaded by Kevin to suddenly agree to his offer, no one else was willing to complain like a hothead anymore. Therefore, they could only feel anger deep in their hearts, but they didn't dare to say anything out of fear that they would stick out like a sore thumb and face the same fate. "I know it's just a very small possibility, but what will we do if Kevin succeeds in his mission?" One of them couldn't help but wonder. The hall suddenly became quiet for a moment as they thought about the possibility. "I don't think it could happen, but it's hard to say. After all, the Radiance is a new organization." Another was quite unsure of what to think. "I think it's better to play it safe either way. If Kevin fails, we won't make much of a fuss about it, and if he succeeds, we'll have to express our undying gratitude towards him," a third one suggested. With just a few words, the atmosphere suddenly changed drastically. Preparing for the looming possibility that Kevin would return victorious, everyone was now thinking of ways to please him and get on his good side. A large number of people had gathered outside a residential building in Chicago. Spencer had brought the members of the Radiance along with Drake Cook and his men to seal off all of the routes around the building and along the street. "Is your information accurate?" Spencer glanced at Drake with a condescending look and told him, "You should know who we're trying to save. We can't allow any mistakes or accidents to happen." Although Drake's power had increased tremendously, in Spencer's eyes he was still just a lowly person who could easily be crushed. Because of that, he really didn't trust him that much. "Don't worry, my men have already checked everything out. They're definitely being kept here." Drake didn't like Spencer's arrogant look. Before his arrival, Mitchell Cook had already warned Drake that Spencer was Kevin's right-hand man, so he wasn't someone that he would dare to provoke. "Later, have your men guard the hallway downstairs. I'll bring some of mine with me to rescue Lily and Phoebe." Spencer only told Drake one thing. Without giving him any time to answer, Spencer began to coordinate with the Radiance's members around him. "He thinks too highly of himself," Drake thought to himself unhappily. "If he fails to rescue the two women, I'd want to see how he's going to explain himself to Kevin." A few minutes later, everything was ready. Spencer ordered hundreds of the Radiance's members to enter the building. Inside, they were to split into different groups with dozens of people each guarding the staircase, hallway, and the elevator entrance of each floor. Meanwhile, Spencer personally led over 20 members to the 8th floor, where Lily and Phoebe were reportedly being held. After confirming their room location, Spencer raised his hand and gave the signal, and 2 of his men kicked the door open. But before they could rush in, over 10 darts suddenly flew out from inside the room, and the 2 men who were at the front bore the brunt of it as the darts immediately pierced through their chests. Luckily, Spencer reacted quickly enough to evade them. Otherwise, he would have probably suffered some injuries himself before going through the door, even if he'd used his spiritual energy to form a protective barrier. Downstairs, Drake was smoking. When he heard the commotion upstairs, he couldn't help but smile disdainfully. "Serves them right for looking down on me," Drake thought to himself. Just then, his group of men guarding the downstairs hallway suddenly split into 2 as Mitchell, Cook, and Rachel came over in a hurry. "Dad, Miss Collins." Drake immediately threw away the cigarette in his hand and greeted them respectfully. Mitchell Cook looked around and asked, "Did you save them already? Where are Lily and Phoebe?" "Spencer is still up there with his men right now," Drake answered and lowered his head. "Then what are you still doing downstairs?" Mitchell Cook scolded him roughly. "I didn't ask you to come here to be a lookout. How can I take credit if you weren't the one who saved them?" Mitchell Cook seemed to act very humbly in front of Kevin, but he was also a famous figure in Chicago in his own right, so it wasn't easy for him to let someone else take the lead or the credit. Earlier that morning, he and Adriana Wright had received news that Kevin had ordered the Radiants to come to Chicago to look for someone. This matter got a lot of people very upset. Even Commissioner Ronald Campbell, who was one of the most powerful people in Chicago, given his ties to the federal government, had personally called him the previous night to inquire about the situation. Other than a selected few of Kevin's most trusted people, no one could have imagined how a useless son-in-law like Kevin, who had been ridiculed by everyone for the past 3 years, would suddenly become the CEO of the Williams Company. And now he even had the Radiance, which was also rising to prominence among the great powers. "Mitchell, now isn't the time to get angry. What matters is that Lily and Phoebe are safe." Rachel also put on a stern face and tried to smooth things over. "You should be thankful that Rachel's here, so I won't argue with you right now. But if this rescue operation fails, I'll deal with you accordingly." Mitchell Cook gave Drake a fierce look. As they were talking, loud noises could be heard from above them. By the sound of it, they could tell that there was an extremely intense battle going on in the building. Suddenly, a few more screams came from the roof as everyone looked up and saw 4 or 5 figures falling down. In the blink of an eye, they quickly fell to their deaths on the sidewalk below, piled in a bloody heap. Derek had just paid a visit to Richard Swinton and was back in the Radiance headquarters. Because of Kevin's instructions, he had no choice but to do this more than 10 times over the past 2 days to find out if Richard needed anything. Just as Derek was about to go back to his office and review a few documents, a Radiance member hurriedly came forward to report. "Sir, someone from the Myriads has come to visit." Derek's expression immediately changed when he heard that. Along with Kevin, he and Spencer were both originally from the Myriads, and it could be said that the foundation of the Radiance was built upon the members of their Chicago branch. So all kinds of possibilities raced through his mind and heart when he thought about it. Derek wondered to himself, could it be that the Myriads know about our involvement with the Radiance? If so, doesn't the Chancellor have a good relationship with the Supreme Commander? And in that case, the Myriads couldn't have come here to denounce him. We haven't even had a few days of peace yet. Why did they have to come here today? Derek let out a long sigh. It seems like I can't catch a break these days.
Back in the Radiance headquarters, Derek had just gotten back from meeting Richard Swinton when one of their members informed him that someone from the Myriads had come to visit. Given his previous involvement with them, all kinds of thoughts suddenly raced through his mind and heart as he didn't know how the situation would unfold. "What's wrong, sir?" The Radiance member who had informed Derek saw that there was no movement from him and asked with concern. "Is it because you don't want to see anyone from the Myriads? Do you need me to call a few of our men to kill the person?" This man had obviously been recruited by the Radiance later on, so he had no idea about the real situation. Kill him? Only then did Derek come back to his senses. "Do you even have that ability? Wherever he is, take me to see him immediately." Derek was very aware of the current state of the Radiance's headquarters. After the initial stage of recruitment and development, Kevin had already transferred all of his elite experts to St. Louis, under the leadership of the 5 Hill siblings. Moreover, Spencer had also brought his trusted men to Chicago and stationed others in Detroit. This included anyone else with existing ties to the Myriads. Currently, those who remained in the headquarters were all new recruits who were still in the early stages of their training. So if they were to become declared enemies of the Myriads and be forced to battle them at this critical moment, the Radiance's headquarters would be faced with a catastrophe. And given that the entire Chicago branch of the Myriads had switched sides to become members of the Radiance, this would be considered a grave betrayal, further increasing the likelihood of provoking the wrath of their former group. Since Derek had been with the Myriads for years, he knew how powerful the organization was, and if the Myriads had really come here today to denounce them, he had to call Kevin immediately to decide on what to do. Over 10 minutes later, Derek finally arrived at the entrance. The headquarters of the Radiance was built on a mountain and with various traps and detours set along the way. This made it difficult for even a level 5 expert to enter on his own if he wasn't being careful. Roger Knott stood there with his hands behind his back, observing the mountains and rivers surrounding the entrance. His eyes couldn't help but reveal some surprise and awe. Brett Stewart had previously asked Roger to send someone to the Radiance headquarters and deliver the letter he had written. Knowing this, Roger was worried that this would spark some conflict between the two, so he decided to personally bring the letter to him. This way, he could also use this as an opportunity to pay a visit to the newly established organization to see if there was any way that they could remain on good terms with each other. "May I ask who you are?" Derek sized up the old man in front of him. Derek could feel an extremely powerful aura coming from Roger's body, so he knew that he couldn't afford to be careless. "My name is Roger Knott, and I'm the Grand Elder of the Myriads. Today I received orders from the Supreme Commander to deliver this handwritten letter from him, and I also plan to pay a visit to the Radiance's Chancellor," Roger Knott explained as he respectfully lowered his head. Derek took a deep breath upon hearing Roger's words. When he was still in the Myriads, he had heard of Roger Knott's reputation. He didn't expect the newly appointed Supreme Commander would send someone like him to their headquarters. Fortunately, Roger Knott had a high rank within the Myriad, so he didn't recognize a small fry like Derek. "Mr. Knott, I'm sorry, but the Chancellor isn't here at the moment," Derek replied in neither a submissive nor arrogant manner.
but he was extremely nervous deep in his heart.
Then may I ask if Kevin Williams is here? He's a good friend of our Supreme Commander, so I can pass this letter to him directly.
Roger sized up Derek, but when he sensed his energy base, he couldn't help but feel surprised that the man he was speaking to was so powerful. I'm really sorry, Mr. Knott, but Mr. Williams went to St. Louis today. Derek thought for a while and added, Actually, you don't need to hide anything, Mr. Knott. In case you were wondering, Mr. Williams is also a good friend of our Chancellor. However, he chose not to join the Radiants. Derek wasn't a fool. He already figured out the real reason why Roger Knott had come. This was a ruse to meet Kenneth Wilkinson and to see with his own eyes if Kevin had betrayed them. Roger's expression changed a little.
My old bones are tired from the long journey I've been through. I wonder if you would be kind enough to let me stay here for a few days to rest. After all, this letter was personally written by our Supreme Commander. I'm willing to wait until the Chancellor or Mr. Williams comes back, but please let me see them, sir.
You're too polite, Mr. Knott. Derek couldn't believe it. Was he dreaming, or did Roger Knott really just call him sir? At the same time, he felt even more grateful to Kevin. Originally, with his lowly status in the Myriads, he could only kneel down and lower his head in front of someone like Roger Knott. But now, not only were the two of them on equal footing, but Roger was also being respectful towards him. This was something that he would have never expected to happen in his lifetime. The bandits' hideout on the top of Blade Mountain was currently on fire. Alpha Dixon and his brothers knelt down on the ground and lowered their heads to Kevin respectfully.
From now on, we will follow you with our lives, Chancellor,
the 7 brothers declared at the same time. Upon hearing this, all of their henchmen followed suit as they knelt down and lowered their heads as well. All right, from now on you will all be part of the family. Welcome to the Radiants. Kevin greeted them with a smile and patted the 6 brothers on the shoulders. 10 minutes before, when Alpha and the others saw that their brother Charlie was safe and sound, they immediately gathered together in a huddle and cried tears of joy after being reunited. Kevin took this opportunity to reason with them, and only then did he manage to recruit them all. I really didn't realize that I had such a glib tongue in the past. Looks like I should consider using it more when I get back to the Williams Company in the future, Kevin thought to himself as he walked down the mountain with everyone. The casualties of the Radiance members in this battle were very minimal under Kevin's proper command. Most of them had only suffered minor injuries, which would heal and recover in no time. Moreover, he was able to gain 7 powerful experts in the Dixon brothers, as well as their remaining henchmen. This showed how effective Kevin's leadership and strategy were when he was in a battle. Meanwhile, in the Thompson family's mansion in St. Louis, Richard Swinton was discussing matters with Herman and Joseph Thompson. Stanley Cooper and Terrence Price had left for the time being to pick up some important people.
It's been half a day. Why hasn't there been any news yet?
Richard Swinton's eyebrows furrowed.
Those forces in Blade Mountain can't be underestimated. Although the energy base of the Radiants isn't low, it'd still be a little difficult for them to conquer those bandits,
Herman Thompson explained calmly.
But Mr. Williams had boasted about defeating them in front of so many powerful people. If he can't take down those bandits within the day, the prestige of the Radiants will surely be diminished,
Joseph Thompson said thoughtfully. Just then, Kyle Thompson excitedly ran and stumbled into the hall as he greeted the others in high spirits.
How are you, son? Why are you still so clumsy?
Joseph scolded him with some dissatisfaction.
Sorry, Dad. I just couldn't wait to tell you the good news that I just found out. The bandits' hideout at the top of Blade Mountain has been burned into ruins. Rivers of blood were flowing everywhere, and the battle was extremely fierce. I don't need to know all the details, just cut to the chase and tell us the result.
Joseph interrupted his son before he could finish.
In the end, the Radiants crushed the bandit group by a landslide, and Mr. Williams even managed to recruit their 7 leaders to follow him,
Kyle Thompson happily summarized.
That means Kevin succeeded, right?
Richard felt his eyes brighten up, and he broke into a large grin.
I can't believe it. Mr. Williams actually did it. It seems like the strength of the Radiants has far exceeded our expectations.
Joseph couldn't help but exclaim. The heaviness in Herman Thompson's heart finally disappeared. He had made the right bet after all.
Immediately inform all the prominent families in St. Louis to give Kevin a warm welcome as soon as he arrives.
Herman quickly made arrangements. Compared to the happiness in the Thompsons' mansion, the atmosphere at the Huxley family mansion was much different. In his study, Virgil Huxley suddenly flipped his sandalwood table over his hands after hearing the news.
Didn't you say that Blade Mountain would be easy to defend and hard to attack? Those Dixon brothers were all useless. How many hours did it take? Were they all killed by Kevin?
Virgil Huxley roared furiously. Curtis Green lowered his head in silence, not even daring to breathe loudly. A few minutes later, Curtis forced himself to speak. The most important thing for now is to think about the Huxley family's escape plan out of St. Louis. After all, the Dixon brothers might have already exposed our involvement behind the scenes to Mr. Williams. What Curtis said was right. In fact, the Huxley family had always been secretly in contact with the people in Blade Mountain, even funding their operations to cause trouble for all the other families in St. Louis. Moreover, they were the ones who tipped them off in advance about the Radiance's plans to attack them. Virgil leaned back in his chair and took a series of deep breaths, trying his best to calm himself down. After a moment, he suddenly stopped and looked harshly at Curtis.
I've already made the necessary arrangements for my family, but it's best to keep that information internally. Now, if you don't have anything else to report, you may leave.
At the Huxley family's mansion, Virgil Huxley fumed with anger upon hearing the news of Kevin and the Radiance's successful mission at Blade Mountain. When Curtis Green advised him to think about an escape plan out of St. Louis, Virgil coldly remarked that he had already made arrangements, but would keep that information to himself. He then promptly sent Curtis on his way out. Upon hearing this, Curtis Green widened his eyes and looked grimly at Virgil Huxley. His lips were trembling and he wanted to say something, but he couldn't. When he found out that the bandit group at Blade Mountain had been conquered, he knew very well that if the Huxley family wanted to be safe and sound, they would have to sacrifice some people in order for them to escape. However, Curtis never thought that Virgil would push him out so easily after all his years as his personal assistant. On the highway leading to St. Louis, hundreds of buses were traveling together, all carrying the members of the Radiance. It was a spectacular sight. In one of those buses, Kevin was lying back in his seat, resting with his eyes closed.
"Chancellor!"
Alpha suddenly called out. This immediately drew the attention of everyone on the bus. "We still have an hour on the road before arriving in St. Louis. Why don't you take a rest?" Kevin answered him without even opening his eyes.
"Chancellor, I feel that since we're already under your command, there are some things that I must tell you."
Alpha seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "Tell me about it." Kevin suddenly became interested.
"First off, I think that it's time to formally introduce ourselves. We've been known for so long either as simply the Dixon brothers or our alphabetical rank. But since we're part of your family now, it's only appropriate that we start going by our real names once again. And they're not too far off from our code names."
Alpha then introduced himself and his brothers.
"My name is Alfred Dixon, and my brothers are Brandon, Chad, Declan, Eddie, Finn, and Gavin."
"Nice to finally know all of your names," Kevin smiled. "Is there anything else that you wanted to share?"
"Well, since we're being open and honest here, there are a couple more things. To tell you the truth, we've always been in contact with the Huxley family of St. Louis throughout our time in Blade Mountain. They were actually the ones who tipped us off about the value of every convoy of goods that would pass by our area, and when we should make a move on them. After we successfully intercept them, we'll then divide the profits with the Huxley family."
Alfred Dixon lowered his head slightly, but his tone was sincere.
"I hope you understand that we only did it to survive."
Kevin's face instantly turned gloomy when he heard this.
There's one more thing. The Huxley family was also the one who told us that you were bringing some people from the Radiance to eliminate us. Since we knew what time you were coming, we were already expecting your arrival. And this is why we were able to ambush your members with a bomb,"
Alfred admitted in a somewhat ashamed tone of voice. In fact, their bandit group had made sufficient preparations for a lengthy battle, but the people of the Radiants were just too powerful, especially under Kevin's leadership. And in the end, they didn't have enough strength to fight back. Kevin took a deep breath and his eyes suddenly opened with a cold gaze. He thought he knew Virgil Huxley pretty well as an honorable man. Not only had he asked Thornton to keep his promise to Kevin, but he also asked Thornton to follow him. Moreover, Virgil Huxley even invited the Radiants to visit his mansion as guests and was supportive of their move into St. Louis. Weren't he and Richard Swinton busy preparing for their arrival? He never expected that the Huxley family would be the local snake behind the bombing at the airport. And now he had just found out that Virgil Huxley was also the main culprit behind the problems that Richard and the other families were encountering in Blade Mountain. How could he betray everyone behind their backs? Fortunately, the Radiance was strong enough to succeed in their mission this time. But what if it was some other power that they had to face? Wouldn't Kevin and his men fall into a more precarious situation? Back in Chicago, Mitchell, Cook, Rachel, and Drake stood somberly as they waited downstairs. The sound of intense fighting could still be heard from inside the residential building, and by now many parts of the structure had already been damaged. All of a sudden, the noise disappeared and the entire building seemed to have been enveloped by a deafening silence. After more than 20 minutes, Spencer finally walked downstairs with forceful steps. His clothes were stained with a lot of blood. By the look on his face, it was obvious that he wasn't satisfied with the outcome.
"Spencer, were you able to rescue Lily and Phoebe?"
Drake sized him up and asked with a sneer.
"There's a problem with the information you were given. They weren't here at all."
Spencer didn't even look at him.
"I'll give you 2 more days. If you still can't find them then, the Radiants will move into Chicago."
He then called his men and quickly walked out of the building. Upon hearing this, Mitchell, Cook, and Rachel looked at each other with troubled eyes. They knew very well what Spencer meant. They had been updated on the Radiance's actions in all the other cities in the Midwest. And even though they were trusted allies of Kevin, they knew what had happened when the Radiants entered Detroit and St. Louis. While the great powers could use their strength to battle amongst each other, how could ordinary people like them be a match for a rising power like the Radiants? A large group of highly ranked people and influential families from all over St. Louis were currently gathered in the Thompson family's mansion.
Didn't I tell you that Mr. Williams would definitely succeed? None of you believed me before, so how does it feel to be mistaken now?
One of the leaders boasted.
Who said I didn't believe you? I've always regarded Mr. Williams as our savior.
An elder defended himself.
"Only a special talent like Mr. Williams is qualified to lead the Radiants. After all, he's helped us all a great deal by eliminating such a heavy burden."
Another business owner praised him. Listening to the comments these people were making, Richard Swinton was so happy that he couldn't stop smiling.
"Why are you so happy?"
Joseph Thompson looked at him in surprise.
"My foster son just won such a fierce battle. Shouldn't I be happy and proud of him?"
Richard replied with a grin.
"Do you really think that Kevin and the Radiants can enter St. Louis smoothly after this?"
Joseph asked carefully. His words were like a splash of cold water in Richard Swinton's face. Deep down, he had also thought about that same problem. Both of them knew that the Battle of Blade Mountain could only provide the Radiants a showcase of their might and raise Kevin's image in St. Louis's heart. However, before they could fully move into St. Louis, they still had to prove themselves in other ways and be tested by more opposing forces and hidden figures along the way. Richard Swinton's eye swept across the hall as he smiled uncomfortably at everyone. His gaze became deeper and deeper. The game had already begun. And with all of these men secretly looking to gain as much power as they could over their peers, the question was, Which of these top people in influential families would be the next to make a move against Kevin?
Since there are many people who want to mess around with my foster son, I don't mind stepping in with them myself,
Richard calmly said as he picked up his mug to drink some coffee. You want to play the game with them yourself? Joseph Thompson asked in surprise. As hundreds of buses slowly drove into St. Louis, Kevin was immediately welcomed by crowds of people the moment he got off his bus. The situation in Blade Mountain had gotten more and more dangerous, but no one in St. Louis had been strong enough to stop them. Because of that, they'd resigned themselves to endure the bandit group as long as they couldn't do anything about them. But now, someone finally stood up for them. And with the protection of the Radiants, the citizens felt that they would finally be safe in St. Louis. With Mr. Williams and the Radiants here, St. Louis will definitely see better days in the future, one of the onlookers praised. Mr. Williams, please stay here and don't leave. We can't be without your protection, another begged. The people in the crowd who were welcoming them all loudly cheered along as Kevin passed by them. Mr. Williams, it seems like our standing in St. Louis has improved a lot. Dylan Hill suddenly remembered Kevin's reminder on the bus not to address him as Chancellor in public. Dylan enjoyed this feeling very much. It was completely different from what he'd experienced in Detroit in the past. Although the Hill family used to be powerful, the civilians expressed more fear than respect and admiration towards them. Now it was different. And because of this, Dylan was even more certain that deciding to follow Kevin was the right choice. It was a wonderful feeling to support righteousness and justice. We have to thank Alfred and his brothers for that, Kevin joked with a smile.
Mr. Williams, that's all in the past now.
Alfred Dixon and his brothers flashed awkward smiles. Facing the enthusiastic citizens of St. Louis, it was only then that they clearly realized how much of a thorn they were with all the trouble that they had caused. Luckily, no one here recognized them. Otherwise, the crowd's reception would definitely be much different for them right now. I'm just messing with you, but let this be a reminder of the difference between harming and benefiting others. Kevin patted his shoulder and said earnestly, After all, you've said goodbye to your old ways, haven't you? Alfred was stunned for a moment, then quickly lowered his head and nodded firmly. After making arrangements for the other members of the Radiants, Kevin brought Dylan Hill with him to the Thompson family's mansion. As soon as they stepped inside, they heard the sound of cheers and applause. Mr. Williams, you're finally back. Kyle Thompson walked up to greet him. How is everyone? Is Grandpa Thompson doing well? Kevin nodded and replied. Everyone is in high spirits and looking forward to your return. Kyle's eyes were full of admiration for his brave and powerful mentor. Kevin had just returned to the Thompson family's mansion along with Dylan Hill. When they got there, they were greeted enthusiastically by Kyle Thompson, who told them that everyone inside was excited to see him again. Kevin didn't say anything else and walked straight into the main hall. When they saw him, everyone immediately stood up, including Herman Thompson. Congratulations, Mr. Williams. You've helped us get rid of a huge threat in St. Louis. We now firmly support the Radiants. One of the leaders praised him. They said that St. Louis doesn't have great powers protecting them. Well, now we have our own. Long live Mr. Williams and the Radiants, another elder proudly declared. As all of these influential people scrambled to get closer to Kevin, all kinds of flattering words came out of their mouths. It was as if they all wanted to attract Kevin's attention. Thank you for your kind words. In that case, we, the Radiants, will need you to take care of us when our forces move fully into St. Louis in the future. Kevin replied respectfully. Of course we will, Mr. Williams. Only with your presence in St. Louis can we be safe and sound. One of the high-ranking people reassured him. Who was the one who opposed Mr. Williams before? Come forward so I can deal with you myself. A distinguished elder challenged the group. Mr. Williams, I have a good project I'd like you to be involved in. Why don't we discuss it later? A successful businessman generously offered. Looking at the scene in front of them, Joseph Thompson and Richard Swinton exchanged a knowing smile as they shook their heads. At the same time, Jake Morris, who was staying in another mansion in St. Louis at the time, had just heard the report from one of his men and angrily smashed a chair into pieces in frustration. His body was emitting a violent aura at the moment. "Lily Williams and Phoebe Anderson were rescued?" Jake asked coldly. "No, boss. We managed to find out that they were coming beforehand, so our men were able to transfer them to a different location in time. We only lost a few level 4 experts in the scuffle," the man nervously reported while keeping his head lower. "Why weren't we able to completely withdraw our men from the original hideout?" Jake's expression didn't change in the slightest. Although level 4 experts were only considered to be mid-level warriors in the Morris family, it wasn't easy to train people to replace them, especially without something like the power pill to boost their energy base. "Unfortunately, not everyone managed to escape in time," the man replied with a trembling voice. He was almost unable to withstand the pressure of Jake's brewing temper. "I never thought that a useless son-in-law would have such a huge network of influence in Chicago," Jake muttered to himself in a low voice. Lily and Phoebe were his most effective trump cards against Kevin. If they were rescued, how else could the Morris family get the pill formula so easily from him? "Boss, why don't you withdraw our men from Chicago?" the man suggested as enormous beads of sweat kept dripping down from his forehead. "Why would I do that? Wouldn't that imply that I'm afraid of Kevin?" Jake's face became twisted. "He's just a useless son-in-law. He doesn't hold a candle to me." After thinking for a few minutes, Jake spoke again. "Take your team to Chicago right away. The 5 of you will have to issue a warning to all the influential people and great powers involved in this matter. None of them must anger my family. Otherwise, they will feel our wrath." "Yes, boss." After the man received the order, he quickly left the room. Inside the Williams family's mansion in New York, Vivian Meyer slowly let out a huge sigh, but her face still looked somewhat pale. "Enchantress, are you feeling all right?" Renee Silver asked her out of concern. "Don't worry. Wayne Ford didn't hurt me physically. He just messed up the balance of my spiritual energy. I should fully recover in a few days." Vivian slowly stood up as she answered. "It seems like Wayne Ford has decided to protect that thief Kevin. What should we do now, Enchantress?" Renee looked very distressed by the situation. She initially thought that Wayne Ford would at least be more respectful to Vivian Myers. However, he not only acted harshly towards her, but he even started a fight with her in front of all the leaders and elders of the great powers. Kevin is, after all, a student of the Healing Arts School. Given his special talent, he gives a huge boost to their reputation. We clearly underestimated that fact this time." Vivian sighed again softly, and she had a very disappointed look in her eyes. "Do we really have no chance against him at all? Should we just let Kevin do as he pleases?" Renee refused to accept this willingly. "Don't worry. It's not like there are no opportunities on the horizon. Every year there will be a student assessment at the Healing Arts School. In the past, many students have lost their lives because of it," Vivian calmly explained. Renee Silver immediately understood what she meant. Vivian Myers wanted to make a move during the upcoming student assessment. "During the assessment, Kevin won't have the protection of the Healing Arts School. That'll be the best time for us to make our move," Vivian said with certainty. However, her heart was still full of doubt. Wayne Ford's character was widely known among the great powers as an honorable man. How could a highly respected person like him protect such a shameless person like Kevin? Was Kevin hiding a secret that she was unaware of? Or was it because Renee Silver had exaggerated his offenses against the Union in her report to the headquarters? Could the Williams family have misjudged his true character? Was Kevin really the enemy? Because of this, Vivian thought to herself, I wonder who I should go to so I can learn the truth. In the meeting room of the Central Alternative Healing Academy in Chicago, Paul Vaughn and the other leaders of the 9 grade schools were gathered together.
Kevin is still nowhere to be found. What should we do now?
Paul Vaughn asked with some worry.
It seems that we've really underestimated Kevin's weakness. Even though we'd managed to capture his mother-in-law, we still haven't seen any reaction from him.
Jeffrey Bowie pounded his fist on the table.
What if it's because the person we caught doesn't carry enough weight in Kevin's heart?
Wayne Ford shared his thoughts as he began to frown. The entire room became quiet when he said that. If that was indeed the case, they had to abduct someone else. Although what they were doing was against the principles of the great powers, they had to do whatever it took in order to obtain the Power Pill formula. All of them wanted to increase the strength of their schools to improve their security in the upcoming war with the Pinnacle. Up until this point, none of them were afraid of being ridiculed if others eventually found what they'd been up to. As far as they were concerned, the end goal justified the means. So sacrificing Kevin's family was simply an insignificant loss in the grand scheme of things. Jeffrey Bowie stood up and looked around the room before offering another option.
Why don't I take some people with me and bring his parents here as well?
A middle-aged man suddenly stood up and barked.
That's enough!
His objection attracted everyone's attention. The man was Stephen Walker, who was the head of the Northwest Healers College. His energy base had already reached close to that of a level 6 expert. The scythe in his hand was a blade that he had perfectly mastered, and he was extremely famous in the great powers because of his unique weapon of choice. However, he was usually quiet, so they didn't usually hear much from him during the meetings.
What's the meaning of this, Stephen?
Jeffrey asked sternly.
Listen carefully.
Stephen ignored Jeffrey Bowie and continued in a deep voice.
Haven't we done enough by capturing Kevin's mother-in-law? It's already despicable of us to force him to surrender by threatening an innocent person. If we attack his parents now, won't the members of the Alliance and the Myriads laugh their heads off at us? How different would we be from them then? Moreover, won't the rest of the great powers lose their respect for us if they found out? Don't tell me that you want us to give up before we've reached our goal. Let me remind you what the Power Pill formula means to us.
Paul Vaughn's face gradually darkened. He'd always been unable to put up with Stephen Walker's behavior or even his mere presence. As a result, it wasn't a secret that the Central Alternative Healing Academy had a tenuous relationship with the Northwest Healers College. It was just that they had set their differences aside in favor of keeping the top 10 schools in order. And without any major issues, things between them had eased a little over the past few years. That was, until now.
If you really want the Power Pill formula so badly, then why don't you just go and ask Kevin nicely for it? How can you keep calling yourself righteous if you're willing to play tricks like this?
Stephen asked very calmly. The atmosphere in the room instantly became tense as Paul Vaughn's face seemed to be covered in dark clouds. A second later, he couldn't hold it in any longer and stood up in anger. As he did, the spiritual energy surrounding his body was emitting a violent aura. At the Central Alternative Healing Academy, Paul Vaughn and the other leaders of the 9 grade schools were gathered together. With Kevin still not resurfacing in Chicago despite his mother-in-law being captured, Jeffrey Bowie suggested that they go after his parents next. However, Stephen Walker objected, as he questioned their righteousness for using such measures just to obtain the Power Pill formula. This made Paul Vaughn, who had always had a tenuous relationship with Stephen, stand up in anger while emitting a violent aura.
It's not like you objected to anything the first time, but if you think you're so morally superior to the rest of us, you can just get the hell out of here right now before I do anything else to you. This is my school,
and you have no right to act disrespectfully here," Paul Vaughn yelled at him. Then he took some deep breaths to contain his anger. "It took me long enough to realize that a useless man like you isn't good at scheming." Before Stephen could say anything else, he stopped himself as he turned around and left the meeting room. When the door slammed shut, Wayne Ford finally made up his mind. "Paul, I'll have to trouble you to take a business trip." In the main hall of the Thompson family's mansion in St. Louis, Kevin was spending some time chatting and laughing with many influential people. When the gathering was finally over, he followed Richard Swinton back home. After their short discussion, they had all come to an agreement. The top leaders had agreed to let the Radiants settle in St. Louis. In order to help them, they would open up a space for them in the southern part of the city. "Looks like everyone who came to the Thompson family's mansion today has welcomed you with open arms." Richard Swinton praised Kevin as he took a sip of coffee and looked at him with approval. "The game has just begun." Kevin read between the lines and understood what Richard Swinton had meant. Those who hadn't come to the meeting were his future enemies in St. Louis, and the most prominent one of them all was the Huxley family. "Dad, what do you think about Virgil Huxley?" Kevin asked in a low voice. "Virgil Huxley is a very powerful man," Richard Swinton admitted generously. "Since taking over as patriarch of the Huxley family, they've been getting stronger and stronger under his management." "Why didn't he come to the meeting? Does that mean the Huxley family isn't going to welcome the Radiants?" Kevin asked with a slight frown. Despite everything bad that he'd heard about Virgil Huxley since the bombing incident at the airport, the attitude that he had previously shown him was that of a kind and honorable man. He even thought that Virgil was humble, especially after apologizing on behalf of Thornton's arrogance in the past. Therefore, Kevin still couldn't understand why he would play such dirty tricks behind his back. "Don't underestimate Virgil Huxley. His style of scheming is so deep and hidden that even I can't see through him completely." Richard Swinton put down his coffee mug and warned Kevin solemnly. "I'm afraid that his opposition will cause you and the Radiants to encounter great obstacles in St. Louis in the future." "Dad, what do you think will happen if the Huxley family is destroyed?" Kevin suddenly asked. Richard Swinton didn't answer his question right away. He just looked at Kevin pensively as he carefully gathered his thoughts. After some time, Richard shook his head. "Your idea is quite dangerous. The Huxley family has a strong foundation in St. Louis. A local snake like that will be hard to kill, and Virgil won't hesitate to strike you with a venomous bite if he's provoked." Without waiting for Kevin to speak, Richard Swinton continued. "I can see that you're hoping for the Radiants to gain a foothold in St. Louis. Leave the Huxley family to me and let me deal with them accordingly. Just treat it as a gift from your foster father." Just then, they could hear a hearty laugh coming from outside. Virgil Huxley's deep voice could be heard. "Please don't get mad, Kevin. I'm sorry I got held up at home earlier, but I hope it's still not too late for me to welcome you and the Radiants into St. Louis." After seeing the person who had just arrived, Kevin and Richard Swinton looked at each other in surprise. Speak of the devil! Weren't they just talking about Virgil Huxley? Kevin stood up and answered respectfully. "Uncle Virgil, there's no need to apologize. As the Huxley family's patriarch, you have a lot of things to attend to every day. How can I expect someone of your status to personally welcome me?" "Nonsense, Kevin. You've led the Radiants in wiping out those Blade Mountain bandits in one fell swoop. Because you eliminated a great threat to St. Louis, I'm truly grateful to you." Virgil gave Kevin a big, toothy smile. Suddenly, Virgil's facial expression changed and he spoke again. "However, the reason I was late here was because I found out that a bad apple was discovered in our family earlier today." "What do you mean by that, Uncle Virgil?" Kevin asked curiously. "Kevin, I'm sure you already know what I'm talking about. You don't have to pretend like you know nothing in front of me." Virgil then gestured towards some men who were standing at the door. A few men suddenly escorted Curtis Green into the hall.
"What are you doing, Virgil? Who is this man that you've brought into my home?"
Richard Swinton looked at him, then shifted his gaze onto Curtis. Curtis Green looked a little disheveled and embarrassed. Not only was there a trace of blood on the corner of his swollen mouth, but there were also several bloodstains on his shirt.
"Kevin, Richard, I know you've heard rumblings about a local snake in the city that's being connected to the Huxley family. And this is the person who's been using my name to tarnish my family's reputation. His name is Curtis Green, and he's actually a distant relative of mine. He was the one behind the airport bombing that armed so many of St. Louis's influential figures. Moreover, he even secretly colluded with the bandits at Blade Mountain, collecting cuts from all of the goods that passed through the area."
Virgil explained with a pained expression.
"As soon as I found out who the culprit was, I had my men search the entire city for him. It wasn't easy for me to find someone who's been operating behind the scenes, but now that I've caught him, I'm handing him over to you so that you can deal with him accordingly."
In a luxurious penthouse with a view of Chicago's skyline, more than 10 women with beautiful figures and extraordinary looks were wearing swimsuits that perfectly outlined their figures. Some of them were soaking in the pool while the others were dancing gracefully to the music that was playing. "Mackenzie, everyone else is having fun downstairs. Why are you lying there on the sofa all alone?" Penny Sutherland was holding a glass of red wine in her hand as she walked over to her friend. With less than 2 weeks left before the start of the next semester at the Healing Arts School, Penny Sutherland was too lazy to go back to her family's mansion, so she decided to stay in the city to spend her vacation with some friends. "Go have some fun with the rest of our sisters. I'm just not in the mood to party today," Mackenzie Knott listlessly said as she tore open a bag of potato chips. Penny Sutherland playfully squeezed her friend's shoulders and asked her, "Is there something bothering you? Why don't you tell me about it, sis? Are you pining over some guy or is it something else?" "It's nothing, Penny. I'm just in a bad mood for some reason." Mackenzie lowered her head and seemed to prefer keeping to herself. "Let me guess. Are you thinking about what Grandpa Knott told you?" Penny Sutherland chuckled as she kept trying to find out what was wrong. When Kevin and Dalton Steele appeared at the headquarters of the Myriads and addressed the newly appointed Supreme Commander Brett Stewart like they were brothers, they drew shocked reactions from all of their members, including Roger Knott. After that, Roger quickly spoke with Mackenzie about it in private, telling her that Kevin was a rare genius and a special talent. Knowing this, Roger wanted his grandfather to get close to him. Although she might not be able to become his girlfriend or wife, she should at least find a way to become a trusted friend. From then on, Mackenzie Knott couldn't help but think of Kevin from time to time, and the more she resisted it in her heart, the more frequently Kevin would appear in her mind. Last night, she even dreamt of him. Did this mean that she no longer hated him? When Mackenzie didn't respond, Penny figured that she was onto something. "Mackenzie, tell me the truth. Do you like Kevin?" Penny confronted her. How was Penny Sutherland doing this? One look was enough for her to read Mackenzie's inner thoughts. That's not it. How could you think that of me, Penny? Did you really believe I could be in love with that shameless person?" Mackenzie's pretty face suddenly turned red. Just then, the image of Kevin appeared in her mind again, and it was the embarrassing moment when he saw her picking out clothes in the video call. "Why is your little face turning red then?" Penny Sutherland directly confirmed her statement. "I knew it. If you like him, then don't deny it. Besides, what's there to hide? Isn't your grandfather quite fond of Kevin? And just look at you. What man would be able to resist your stunning beauty?" "Stop teasing me about him, will you?" Mackenzie covered her face with a pillow. "I don't like Kevin, okay? Besides, I wouldn't go after a married man." At the same moment, Spencer was in the Salix Leaf Hotel when he decided to call Derek.
"How are things over there in Chicago? Were you able to rescue those 2 women?"
Derek immediately answered the phone and asked him directly.
"Derek, we ran into a problem.
I only found their hideout and killed some of their men, but Lily Williams and Phoebe Anderson were nowhere to be found by the time we got there," Spencer admitted with some shame. A few seconds of silence passed before Derek coldly berated him. "How could you let that happen? You brought 2,000 of our men to Chicago, but you still weren't able to rescue them? How will I explain this to the Chancellor?" "Derek, don't get mad at me just yet. Although I didn't manage to save them, I didn't come away entirely empty-handed. I found out something important." Spencer wiped the cold sweat from his forehead as he revealed that there was more to the situation than met the eye. Spencer called Derek from the Salix Leaf Hotel to report that he and the 2,000 Radiance members with him who had gone to Chicago hadn't found Lily and Phoebe, even though they destroyed the hideout. But the mission wasn't a complete waste of time, and Spencer had gotten some useful information. "You went to Chicago for a reason. You know who Lily is, don't you?" Derek asked him seriously. "Of course I know who she is. However, I've also heard that although the Jones family has been destroyed, the Chancellor's mother-in-law wasn't among the victims. Instead, she was taken away by the people of the 9 major schools before we got there. So now I'm wondering, do we need to rescue her as well?" Spencer asked nervously. "Don't act rashly yet. We need to report this matter to the Chancellor and let him make the final decision." After thinking for a while, Derek said, "In the meantime, go find Lily and Phoebe." "Yes, sir." Spencer hung up the phone and took a deep breath. Even though the Radiance wasn't afraid of any of the major organizations, they still weren't people they should risk provoking when all 9 schools were gathered in Chicago. In the Thompson family's study at their home in St. Louis, Terrence Price and Stanley Cooper had returned, but the mysterious man from the Capitol wasn't with them. "Mr. Thompson, what do you think about letting Kevin Williams take a position with the government?" Terrence Price asked respectfully. His attitude was very different from the one that he'd displayed when all of this started. Joseph Thompson and Kyle Thompson stared at him in surprise. "Does that mean you're really here to recruit Mr. Williams?" Herman Thompson didn't appreciate his suggestion. "It's not the same, Mr. Thompson. What I mean to do is bring Kevin Williams into Reaper Squad." Terrence Price scratched his head as he replied to him awkwardly. Herman Thompson's withered arm shook violently. He slowly raised his head and looked at him suspiciously. "Is this what the higher-ups want? Is it because of Mr. Williams's ability? Or is it because of the pill formula he's got in his hands?" "Both." Terrence Price nodded solemnly. After 10 minutes of careful deliberation, Herman Thompson slowly shook his head. "Frankly speaking, it's too difficult. Although the Reaper Squad is the best of the best, it still may not be able to accommodate someone like Mr. Williams." Everyone in the room widened their eyes when they heard this. They couldn't believe what Herman Thompson had just said. What kind of group was the Reaper Squad? It was one of the most mysterious organizations in the entire country. Its initial mission was to keep the Morris family in check. That alone shows how powerful it was. Even Terrence Price and Stanley Cooper, these 2 outstanding individuals, could only become honorary members of the Reaper Squad. Terrence Price took a deep breath before coming to a decision. "Regardless of whether it's successful or not, we must give it a try. Mr. Thompson, please contact Mr. Williams for us. Ask him to meet with you at your family's mansion tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon." At the Swintons' family estate, Curtis Green had been locked up by Kevin, but Virgil Huxley wasn't in a hurry to leave. "Mr. Williams, I have something to ask you." Virgil Huxley absent-mindedly licked his lips as he asked, "Did you capture the 7 leaders of Blade Mountain?" Why would the head of the Huxley family ask me something like that? Kevin answered Virgil's question with a question of his own. "I just want to tell you that those 7 people aren't good people at all. It's better to get rid of them as soon as possible. Otherwise, if they cause any trouble in the future, you'll be implicated as well," Virgil Huxley explained carefully. "Furthermore, they've caused quite a lot of trouble for St. Louis.
If you really want the Radiants to gain a foothold in the city, it would be best to throw them out like yesterday's garbage.
The atmosphere in the hall changed instantly. Richard Swinton stared at Virgil Huxley without saying a word. He'd seen through many problems in the past, but he was having trouble seeing this situation clearly enough. It still seemed a little hazy to him. I don't need the leader of the Huxley family to worry about that. Kevin waved his hand casually. He knew very well what Virgil Huxley meant by coming to talk to him right now. Virgil wanted to use Curtis Green as the scapegoat to get rid of all the suspects in the Huxley family, and then ask him to hand over Alfred Dixon and his brothers to avoid any chance of problems in the future.
Mr. Williams, you have to think about it carefully. Those bastards are notorious. There are lots of people in St. Louis who want to kill them. Don't you realize we need to keep the public from getting stirred up?
Virgil Huxley's facial expression and his tone of voice both turned icy cold. Then I'd like to ask if the Huxley family needs to be afraid of a reaction from the citizens of St. Louis. Kevin narrowed his eyes as he asked him this serious question.
Does that mean there's no room for negotiation?
Virgil Huxley replied as he tried to deflect the conversation. It's not that there's no room for negotiation. There's no possibility of negotiation at all, Kevin declared firmly. If Alfred Dixon and the others were to be handed over, would they have any chance of surviving? After all, they were Kevin's subordinates now. And if Kevin couldn't even protect the 7 of them, how could he lead the Radiants to any real progress in the future?
Then I can only advise you to take care of yourself and watch your back.
After saying this, Virgil Huxley got up and left the Swintons' home as quickly as he could. As Kevin watched Virgil Huxley leave, he suddenly turned around and asked Richard Swinton, "What do you think about this, Father?"
"What do I think? I need to take a closer look,"
Richard Swinton joked grimly. This response made Kevin a little anxious.
"Virgil Huxley has invested a lot in all of this. You're not from St. Louis, so you have no idea what status Curtis Green has in the Huxley family."
Richard Swinton let out a long sigh.
"The man is Virgil's trusted assistant. In many respects, he's a lot like Virgil Huxley. He's even more useful than his son Thornton Huxley."
Kevin took in a deep breath as he thought about the implications. He'd always thought that Virgil Huxley would only push out someone that the Huxley family didn't need. He never thought that it would be someone this important. Richard Swinton seemed to have read Kevin's mind. He changed the topic and said,
"However, Curtis Green alone is not enough. He isn't qualified to take on something as crucial as this."
Richard Swinton had known Virgil Huxley for many years, and he could tell from the subtle clues that the Huxley family was really in big trouble this time. If the crisis wasn't handled properly, the family's entire foundation might collapse. It shouldn't be that easy to pry open Curtis Green's mouth and make him talk, should it? Kevin said with a stoic look on his face. At the Radiant's headquarters, Spencer was reading some documents when one of his subordinates hurriedly ran over to him.
"Why are you in such a panic?" Spencer asked him unhappily.
"Sir, something very important has happened. The president of the Herbalist Society's Midwest branch, Nadia Alexander, is currently requesting an audience at the main entrance." The man stammered.
"Who's here?"
Spencer jumped out of his chair as if a fire alarm had just gone off. "President Nadia Alexander," the man gulped in astonishment.
"Quick, take me to her."
Spencer grabbed the man's shoulder and they left the room in a flash. Anyone who was active anywhere in the Midwest had heard Nadia Alexander's name. She was one of the Herbalist Society's most powerful leaders.
"Could it be that there's something wrong with the conditions we gave them? Do you think the Herbalist Society finally can't take it anymore?"
Spencer furrowed his brows and thought to himself. In the past, almost 90% of the herbal medicine in the country was produced by the Herbalist Society. However, in order to recruit new talent to the Radiants, Kevin didn't hesitate to give out all kinds of herbal pills as fringe benefits. This had seriously undermined the Herbalist Society's authority, but both organizations had never interfered with each other's business. However, Everyone understood that this was only because the Herbalist Society hadn't gotten angry, and more importantly, they hadn't been attacked. Otherwise, the Radiants would have had their hands full. If the Radiants could survive the pressure that the Herbalist Society was putting on it, the group would have more than 100 times its current status. This was also the final result that anyone whose strength was at level 5 or higher wanted to see.